So we've now come to one of the most difficult things I think I've got to do, which is to fit this verge trim on. So I've got to fit it right flush with this insulation here, and I've got to make it absolutely vertical, but it's quite bendy, so it's going to be a bit tough to fit it in place as close to that as possible and as vertical as possible. Now I've cleaned the window frame with methylated spirits to give it as good a chance as possible to stick, and now I'm going to try and measure it. Right, there's a cut at a 45-degree angle. Now that should fit nicely into this frame. It seems it does. So now I've got to stick it on really carefully so that it's absolutely vertical. Okay, what I heard is you're supposed to break off this top bit a little bit, because once you've actually got it in place, you can actually pull this off and all that's left is the back bit of the bead. Okay, that seems quite easy. Now you have to pull off the bit of tape here, and that reveals the adhesive, and then that sticks on, and that's what I'm really worried about, because if I stick it in the wrong place, I don't think you can pull it off and stick it back on. I think it's one and done. So I've got to be really careful about this. Okay, I'm practicing before taking the tape off the back of it, and what I've realised is if I take the tape off, I can start off at the bottom like this, pushing it in really carefully, then slowly push it up and make sure it's really flush with that, and that makes it absolutely vertical. So I'm going to try that. Okay, here goes taking the strip off the back. Right, now just be very careful putting it in place. Okay, so it's not stuck anywhere yet. I'm just going to slowly push it in. Right, that's stuck at the bottom. Okay, that actually wasn't too bad. All pushed into place nicely. Looks as though it's in exactly the right line. And maybe I cut it a little bit too long at the top because I've had to push it into the insulation slightly. But I think that'll be okay. And if it's not, I think I can just cut it a little bit after it's on. So I'm quite pleased with that all in all. So that has gone well. There is a little bit of a challenge, which is that if you don't have the edges completely free of this kind of thing, then it's difficult to get it to stick perfectly in. Luckily that one was actually a lot cleaner than this one, but I'm going to have to clean this up so that these don't stick out and so that it can actually grip perfectly there and there's no pushing out of the beading. Okay, so I've made sure this corner's really well cleaned. I've pushed in every little bit and cleaned every little bit of insulation that could possibly stick out and stop this from sticking perfectly on. So now it's time to put it on. So that's great. Now all I need to do is put the one in across the top. Okay, it took a while, just slowly cutting it down to the right size. But now it's ready to fit in place. I've actually cut it a little bit too long, so I've got to shorten it a bit. Okay, that actually didn't work out too well putting that in place. I mean, it's probably all right, but it slightly goes up to that corner. So what I'm going to do is take it off and use the other half, which is down here still, and cut that size and hopefully be able to fit that a bit better. Okay, that's in place now. It's maybe not perfect, but it's definitely better. And when we get to render it and we pull the outer strip off, I think it should all look okay. Okay, I've cut all the beading to size now and put it in place. So that's the starter track bead down there. Then I cut this corner bead. I had to trim that here so that it fits in here. I had to also trim the verge trim bead so it didn't stick out here. And then this top window reveal bead, you'll see I've trimmed it so that there's quite a bit of beading that goes over that corner. It actually comes down here as well. And that's so there's overlaps because there's stress points at the corner. and those overlaps should help prevent cracking in the render when I render it. So now it's time to render, and I've got 48 hours where it's going to be above 5 degrees, so this is the perfect time. Okay, as always, I've got about 2 hours to do this, so I'd better get on with it quickly. I'm going to start off with these beads at the bottom and then slowly work up, probably work up that side and then round the top. Okay, so I've got the verge trim bead all rendered in. Now I'm going to render in the corner bead. Okay, that's been another 20 minutes. So I've got the corner beads in now, and now I'm going to put in place the window reveal bead at the top. Okay, after another 20 minutes, we've got the window reveal trim at the top, and now I'm just checking for how vertical it is. So when I try this, you can see it's just sticking out a little bit. So I need to knock it in a little bit here. And that's quite easy to do. I just peel this off a bit, knock it in and put it back. Okay, that's done now. I've just been over it with a sponge just to smooth everything off and get anything off the edges of these beads. I'm quite pleased with that. It's a thin coat I put on. I'm glad though that I didn't bite off more than I could chew this time. It took me about an hour, and it should set nicely because it's very cold, so it won't dry out. So it's the next day and this is mostly set now. What I'm doing is I'm trying just rendering a small part of it down here. So I've been going over it with this and just trying to make sure it's smooth and that it gets to exactly the right depth, and then I can just easily replicate that for the rest of it. Okay, so it went well yesterday. I now know that I have to go just with the blade just on this bit as I go up, and that'll get it the perfect depth. And now I'm going to start rendering this face as well, and I'll render all around this and this reveal. So it turns out it's actually really easy to do the rendering here. You just pull that knife, that trowel thing's called a knife, pull that up here, and it rests between this bit and this bit here, and just makes a perfectly smooth edge. I think that looks pretty nice. Very smooth this side. Nice and smooth this side, and now I just have to do the top. Well, I wasn't quite sure how to do this. I just put all the render on, made sure it was covered in render, and then I just tried drawing this over, and actually it makes it pretty smooth, just like the other one. And that looks pretty good. One thing I've just realised it's important to do, I've run a knife just underneath the lip there to make sure that the lip is actually overhanging, so the drips won't roll back into that window reveal and onto the window. So there's a nice overhang there now. I'm going to have to finish that off with a sponge, but I'll do that once it started to set more. So that was really easy. Certainly the rendering of those reveals was a doddle compared to rendering a normal wall. There were a few learnings. One was, it was really important to make sure that those strips on the side of the window were straight up, and particularly it was quite difficult to get the one at the top horizontal. So it's important to be careful when you're doing that. And another one was, it was important to get these corners clean, really clean before I put this strip on, so that stuck perfectly and didn't stick out at all. Another one was cutting or rasping. The insulation that I put on here was really easy, so that wasn't a problem at all. Then a really important one was that rendering in multiple sections. So doing a little bit of rendering on the beading here, waiting for that to dry, like I've got here, then rendering later, is absolutely fine. So that's great that you don't need to render it all at once. It makes things a lot easier. So I'm looking forward to finishing off the rest of the house. And then when it's done, I'm going to peel this strip off here. I've got to paint this first, then I've got to cover it with silicone. Then I peel this strip off here, and apparently that leaves a beautiful clean line around the edge of the window. And I'm sure I'll show that in a future video. So I think I might have put the verge trim bead at the top the wrong way round on the last one. So on this upper window, I'm going to try putting it this way round this time. Previously I had it like this, and that meant that the end sticks out a bit and causes a sort of sill. This way means there's no sill, but it does mean that there's a quite large drop going down that way, which means that the water won't run up the back of it. So I'm going to try putting it in this way around, see how that looks, and maybe do that for the rest of the windows. Either way, I don't think it matters too much. So this is what the window looks like when the reveal bead at the top is the other way around. And I think I prefer this. It's more flush with the wall, so it doesn't stick out here. I think that's the way I'm going to do it for the future now. Either way seems fine, but this just looks a little bit neater.